You're locked in to the hottest station on the planet.
Resistance is futile. The revolution has begun.
You're listening to Rebelpreneur Radio, helping you break the rules and build the business you need for the life you want. And now, broadcasting his pirate signal
from somewhere beyond the status quo,
here's your host, best-selling author, marketing and media strategist, Ralph Brogden.
Hello and welcome to Rebelpreneur Radio. It's the show that helps you build the business you need so you can have the life you want. I'm Ralph Brogden. I am a big fan of positive psychology, and mindset is actually one of the categories on the Rebelpreneur website. And from time to time, we have people to come in and talk to us about our mindset. It's that important. We talk about marketing, we talk about money, but if you don't have the right mindset to the thing that you're trying to build and approach it from a positive viewpoint, you're going to struggle and it's not going to be fun. And if it's not fun, it's just not worth doing. If it's not fun, you're not going to stick to it. So we're really fortunate today because today's guest is an expert on the science of fun. And he's going to give you actual reasons why and data that suggests having fun is actually good for your business as well as good for your life. I'm speaking with Dr. Mike Rucker. He is a serial entrepreneur and intrapreneur. Dr. Rucker's book is called The Fun Habit, and it's a book offering a practical reframing of positive psychology, arguing that we should cultivate fun to bring a greater sense of happiness and joy to our lives. So, Dr. Mike Rucker, welcome to Rebelpreneur Radio.
Thank you so much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
I'm really interested and always have been interested in positive psychology as opposed to abnormal psychology, trying to figure out what's wrong with someone. That's kind of depressing to me. And so when I studied psychology, I was really drawn to the positive side of psychology. What is it that causes people to perform, to develop mental resilience and positive self-talk and encouraging and self-motivating? And so I'm really, really fascinated by your area of research, the science of fun. But first, tell us a little bit, how did you get started in your expertise on fun as a way to reframe positive psychology?
Sure. So I was a serial entrepreneur, started in the early 2000s. I had a marketing agency that I co-founded with a couple other gentlemen. And that I had a successful exit out of that company. And then my second endeavor didn't go as well. And so kind of felt myself burnt out. And this is one of those, to give you the short version, one of those serendipitous stories where I got early access to someone who's now become a mentor, a gentleman by the name of Dr. Michael Gervais. He now works as the performance psychologist for the Seattle Seahawks and has a podcast of his own called Finding Mastery. And so during that time, positive psychology was kind of at its infancy, but through, Michael's influence of just, sounds similar to yourself, sort of wanting to understand how the mind works and help myself out of my particular situation, got really involved with the positive psychology movement. Marty Seligman's book, Authentic Happiness, had just come out, and the International Positive Psych Association was just being formed. So I became a charter member of that and have been involved ever since. But fast forward to 2016, up until that point, all of those tools had led to a life that was pretty full of flourishing. And many of those tools, things like gratitude journal and signature strengths, all sort of the foundational items had been really helpful. But that year, 2016, I kind of got walloped by a trifecta of bad news. The biggest one being that my little brother unexpectedly passed away. He had a pulmonary embolism, and it kind of shook everyone in our family. And at the same time, I had been a 2-time Ironman athlete, and at the same time, or a little bit, it was a couple months after, found out that I had advanced osteoarthritis. And in my 40s would need a hip replacement. And because of getting a hip replacement so young, wouldn't be able to run again. And then to top that all off, I was in the throes of finishing my doctoral work. My wife had gotten a really good offer with a company called VF to work in their Wrangler division, which meant uprooting our family from California to North Carolina. So all within a very short span, lost my only sibling, lost the ability to do something I was really passionate about, and was uprooted from our family and friends, which was sort of my support center. And so all of these things that I had learned in the past to kind of get me out of malaise weren't working. But what I did find digging into the research was that one of the things that we don't talk about enough is that we do have some agency, that escapism in some forms isn't necessarily bad, and that it's okay to not identify as happy and still go out and find joy. And that can be a path to actually get you out of despair. And so that tool, we've already alluded to it, is fun. And so, even though I was in this state where I didn't necessarily feel like I wanted to identify as happy because that didn't seem appropriate while I was still bereaving my brother, I still could go out and enjoy myself in ways that were meaningful to myself. And so that was sort of the kernel of, wait, there's something here, where you can delineate wanting to have pleasurable experiences and still not necessarily be in a period of your life where subjective happiness is important.
When we look at all of the statistics, I think it's pretty clear that most people are unhappy at work. And a lot of the Clifton Strengths Finders data support trying to help people to be more happy at work. You're taking that to an extra deeper dimension by talking about cultivating fun, the science of fun. Tell us a little bit more. What are some of the tenets of that approach as opposed to just positive mental attitude?
Yeah, so I think it's the intent of what you want to do. So it's being a little bit deliberate in your approach, but then also, whether you call it the fun habit or a bias towards fun, taking any particular experience that you'll have and trying to see if that you can interject a more pleasurable aspect to it. So with work, you need to be careful, right? And I know that, we'll stay on point with work, but work is a really interesting environment to test some of these theories, because one of the things that you'll often see in leadership is, this idea that you should take your cohorts out to lunch, or, the happy hour after work should be mandatory. But what we find is that especially introverts that feel a sense of duty to attend those events actually aren't extrapolating out joy. So if you,
that sounds like me.
Yeah. And I think that's, it's really, it's one of those things, sometimes it's referred to as survivor bias, right? So A-type people write books for A-type people, right? So unfortunately, there is a lot of great books about leadership out there. But ultimately, some of these strategies that are prescribed aren't necessarily empirically validated, as you mentioned. And so when you peel back the onion, especially now, as we know, people have a stronger voice to kind of share how they feel in their particular environment, being a little bit more inclusive and trying to understand, how somebody might enjoy themselves. So instead of forcing, a colleague to go out and have a drink, maybe it's, a morning walk or, a coffee date, or it's not making them feel obligated to do that at all. And you find other ways to engage, because that's another, problem at work per se, is that what we do know, and you probably know this, from some of your studies with productivity, is that we do need breaks. And so the unfortunate thing is that the way we kind of, the scientific underpinnings of fun are that there's valence, so we're either enjoying ourselves or we're not, right? And so in academic geek speak, we call that valence. But arousal, sort of, where fun lies for you on a spectrum, is different, all across the board. So an analogy that I often use is I love heavy metal concerts. In fact, in your backyard, I couldn't, pre-COVID, was really looking forward to the Rage Against the Machine reunion. And I was going to go out to the Triangle to see them. My wife absolutely despises that, right? Like, loud music isn't the way that she enjoys herself. So, it's those differences that we need to be aware of. But if you can meet folks in the middle and sort of understand that, that's one. And then where I was going, I got a little off track, is that also some folks that aren't high arousal need breaks. So if you, think that taking a colleague out for lunch is fun, but they really perceive that as work, instead of now having, two different really productive 4-hour sessions, you now kind of, burnt them out by lunch and, cut their productivity in half. And so these are important things to kind of peel back, right? Because intuitively, especially if you're wired a different way, they're not going to make sense to you unless you approach the situation with a little bit of empathy.
Wow. And that makes so much sense in a lot of my experiences in the workplace, which it's been a long time since I've been in a workplace. But that makes a lot of sense, because you have someone with type A who wants to do things a certain way, and they're the boss, but it doesn't mesh with your personality. And I think it's really important that we understand there is no right or wrong way to engage. There is just the way you engage. It's your personality. It's the way that you relate to other people. It's how you get energy and how you expend energy. And there is no right or wrong way. It's just that the boss or the leader tends to expect that those around him or her are going to reflect the same style, the same energy, the same mannerisms. And the really enlightened leader recognizes that we need to value people for their different strengths, their different characteristics, and the different ways that they give and receive energy, and not put everybody into that same category as the leader.
Yep, that's exactly right.
So keeping that in mind, and that everyone is different, are there some things we can do to tap into the science of fun so that we can bring more happiness and joy into our work, and then by extension be happier in our lives?
Yeah. So one of the low-hanging fruit there, and intervention that's really easy for anyone to deploy, is an audit of how you spend your 168 hours in a week. And so one of the first things that I have folks do is, starting Monday morning, and I got this from my father is a professor in nutrition. And so I grew up having to do sort of nutritional journals for various PhD students. But since sort of developing my own ideas, an author by the name of Laura Vanderkam has written a very good book about this as well. But it's fairly basic. You just look at, 168 hours isn't that much. And we spend, 56 of those. Well, hopefully most of us spend 56 of those sleeping anyways. And so you divvy up each hour. And I have a 4 quadrant model that I call play. So it's divided into pleasing, living, agonizing, and yielding. You can come up with your own, or you can borrow mine. I think if you Google Rucker play model, it should come right up. And kind of understand each one of those hours, whether or not you feel like it's a pleasurable experience. And it's not like in life we can completely engineer unpleasant experiences out of our day, right? I mean, there's going to be work to be done. Some work isn't necessarily meant to be pleasurable, but more often than not, we find that in our workday, there's opportunities to make it more pleasurable, which in turn will make the work more engaging. And then oftentimes outside of work, what we think are activities that we're engaging in for renewal, when we look at them through a critical eye, they really aren't. And so oftentimes, one of the big ones obviously is social media engagement. And but then a lot of times it will be opportunities where you'll see, this is my little asterisk to this statement because I'm not villainizing media engagement, right? So if you binge watch Netflix with your partner and you really like the show and you enjoy spending time, with whoever your partner is or your children, engage in that, that's not necessarily a poor use of time, but a lot of folks are actually watching things, using leisure time in ways that aren't really renewing when they take that critical eye. Like if you look back at your 168 hours and you can't even indicate what television show you were watching, that's probably not a good use of time. And so we go back to that idea of arousal as well. Certainly you don't want to overprescribe something, right? I look at fun in the same sort of vein as you look at sleep, right? So a lot of us were sleep deprived, and we needed that nudge to get enough sleep. I feel like that's been, well communicated, but it took about 10 years, right? You had the Grant Cardones of the world and the Gary V's of the world. At least Gary V has come back around now, where he said, it's not. Anyways, I don't want to villainize Gary, but we don't need to 10x our productivity necessarily for results. So what we do know through a whole host of research is that if we do overclock, that leads to lower productivity. There's a great book about that, or in part, called Coming Apart. So where I'm going with that is, you can look for these opportunities. I think the asterisk is to say, I'm not advocating, one, for completely turning off the television, or two, staying out till midnight every night so that you can't do your work the next day. But if you look at those 168 hours critically, there's always opportunities to, improve the pleasure that you get in any given week.
Yeah. So it really comes down to being intentional and making sure that the fun activities that you are intending are actually restorative and not just time wasters.
Absolutely. And you can throw some variety in there too, right? So one of the things that's a bit of, contrarian is you need to do the work to sort of identify what it is that brings you joy. And a lot of times, some simple exercises of kind of looking back in your life, whether it's going all the way back to childhood, oftentimes you find these activities from your collegiate days, but, I've seen the gambit of, reconnecting with, just collecting rocks or whatever it is, something that pedestrian to something very profound and reconnecting with it, but then also interspersing, a bit of variety, because you won't necessarily hit a home run every time, but we know from science that variability of, wonder and surprise, we also find engaging. So, an important construct of this work is time. And what we do know is that when our lives are too habitual, that time starts to shrink, because there's this aspect in our brains called heuristics. And the way heuristics work, because our brain doesn't want to expend energy, is, let's say that, we go and inactively watch our kid do gymnastics every weekend. That memory will start to get stored as one memory. And so we'll know that we went every week, but that moment in time really becomes this one memory, where if we're doing something interesting, differently every week, that's stored as 13 different memories. And we have this richer set of experiences, which leads to better resilience and allows us to savor things more. And so it's one of those number games too, right, that you often see in business. So, granted, if you do 13 different things, you might not get a positive result each time, but you'll have more of an index of pleasurable experiences if, instead of not doing anything at all.
We're talking about the science of fun, and I'm with Dr. Mike Rucker. The name of your book is The Fun Habit. It's coming out in 2021. Give us the bird's eye view of what to expect from that book.
Yeah, so it's basically, the first part of the book is explaining the science behind these thoughts and how life has sort of engineered a lot of fun out of our daily lives, and how by having a bias of fun, creating this fun habit, we can instill that back in, similar to some of the reasons that we're seeing obesity, because environmental design has, limited us from doing a lot of things. We're seeing the same thing with fun, where community centers used to be lively and, places where you got to interact with folks and, all sorts of different pro-social behavior just really isn't there anymore. So we need to take a little bit of action to put that back in our lives. And basically what we've talked about, we know burnout is now a global problem. The World Health Organization identified that last year before COVID, and certainly after COVID, I think we're going to see, that only increase. And so the case is made. And then the second half of the book is a lot of tools and strategies, depending, where you are in life, to add more fun into it.
Excellent words of wisdom. If you want to find out more about Dr. Rucker's work and the science of fun, he has some free resources on his website. michaelrucker.com is the place to go to check that out. And we'll have that link on the Rebelpreneur website as well. This has really been educational. I always try to give people a fun experience, and it's been fun talking about fun. And I look forward to your book coming out. Any final thoughts or words of wisdom that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, I would say anyone that's interested in this, definitely take that 168-hour audit and see, where there are opportunities to sort of, create these opportunities for fun. That's the best way to become self-aware. But I guess the parting thought would be that you have a lot of agency to create this. And so, a lot of things that we think are enjoyable are actually, being influenced to us by external sources, sort of these extrinsic motivators that we talk about. And oftentimes when you peel it back, you'll realize that they aren't really filling you up. They're actually, what I call filling the nothing, scrolling on Instagram, waiting for that, next surprise of an interesting picture. Seems like you're having fun, but at the end of the day, when you look at it critically, if you had spent that hour, reconnecting with an old friend, or enjoying a good book, or playing with your dog, or whatever it is that lights you up, even if you just exchange 1 hour in that 168 hours, you're going to start to see an additive effect. And I'm a really big believer in, celebrating the gains, because I think too many of us look at the gap between where we want to be and the happiness that we hope that we have. And ultimately why I think fun is a better process for that is that, each week we can sort of improve, and we don't necessarily need to quant it, but as we make these steps, it educates us that we have a lot more agency and free will over our well-being than we think we do.
Excellent. Dr. Mike Rucker is a serial entrepreneur and intrapreneur, and he's also the author of The Fun Habit, a book offering a practical reframing of positive psychology, arguing that we should cultivate fun to bring a greater sense of happiness and joy to our lives. Find out more at michaelrucker.com. Dr. Rucker, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us on Rebelpreneur Radio. I really appreciate it.
Oh my gosh, thanks so much for having me. This has been a true pleasure.
You've been listening to Rebelpreneur Radio with Ralph Brogden. Download the show notes and much more at rebelpreneur.com.